Let's keep the combo going right now with Ken Rosenthal joining us on Stadium. You can check us out on YouTube as well. Ken, right to the tough stuff. This sucks. I mean, we've talked a lot about the Angels this year, and of course, Ohtani having one of the best seasons we've ever seen. And we kind of put to bed the trade Ohtani conversation, but don't we have to bring it back up when Trout's going to be out for at least a month at this point?
Yes, and Scott, as I wrote today, we're all thinking it. We're all thinking, what does this mean for Ohtani? But I just don't see it happening still. Now, if they fall further out, and if they're really in a place on July 29th and 30th where a playoff run is impossible, okay. But with 3 wild cards, it's difficult to fall completely out. I expect them to remain competitive at least. And right now, they're 4 out in the wild card race. A week ago, they were in the middle of the mix, right in the thick of it. So it's easy for us to trade him. It's not so easy if you're Artie Moreno and you've got all that revenue coming in, and theoretically at least you want to sign him, or at least make a public attempt to sign him to placate your fans. It's also difficult if you're the GM, Perry Minasian, who would have to make this deal and would have to live with it forever. Now, in some ways you can't worry about that as a GM, and most GMs, including Perry, do not. But it's a lot of pressure trading the best player on the planet, maybe the best player who has ever put on a uniform. So I just don't see it still. And I know all the arguments for it, and they're arguments that fans would make, a lot of media would make, and maybe even you guys would make. I heard the conversation before, and you guys were split. But practically speaking, I don't think Artie Moreno wants to do this. I think what he wants to do is take his best shot this season. Every move that they've made going back to the offseason reflects that. And then at the end of the season, you make him an offer, you make him a qualifying offer, you get the draft pick back. It's not the same as you would get back in a trade right now, but it allows them at least a measure of saving face, in my opinion. Now, I'm not looking at this again from a fan's perspective. A fan's going to say, trade him. Not an Angels fan necessarily, but another fan. But if you're the owner of that team, if you're the GM of that team, I'm not sure you're comfortable trading Shohei Ohtani.
Yeah, but Ken, here's my problem. You're not getting anything else back for this guy. You say show and face. Who cares? Guys have made bad decisions in their careers as GMs, as presidents in trades. Like, okay, whoop-de-doo. You're not getting this guy back. They're not making the playoffs. They're in trouble. Their 3 best guys are out. You have to find a way to move on with this guy and get a boatload back for something so you can at least say, like the Reds had a while ago, they weren't good for the last 10 years. So it's time to build up the farm system a little more, get a veteran guy too as well in there to lead the team, and go from there. And then call me crazy. Mike Trout, I know he has a no-trade clause, but get him out of there too. I know people are going to think you're nuts, Frage, but listen, I'm not nuts. It's time to move on. They're not that good of a team. You have to figure out a way to get something back for him as well. That's my opinion.
Todd, you're not nuts. And a lot of people, including I'm sure some executives in baseball, would take their self-interest out of the equation and agree with you. Because if you want to fix this team, you're going one way right now. You're very top-heavy in your roster. It's Trout, Rendon, salary-wise. You've got to pay those guys for a while now. And maybe it's just best to start over. I just don't see Artie Moreno doing that. And it's just not his style. So, yes, you're going to get only a draft pick back in the 75 to 80 range if you make him the qualifying offer and he rejects it, as we all expect. But Artie Moreno, in his head, is probably thinking, I'm going to take a shot at this. I'm not going to simply let this pass without me at least trying to sign him. I think we all know it's not going to happen, especially if they don't make the playoffs this year. In my mind, their best chance of keeping Ohtani was to convince him that they are on the right path. And in some ways they are. They have some good young players. Neto is out right now, others as well. But they have some good things going, just not enough. I just don't see it happening. Now, talk to me in 2 weeks, talk to me in 3 weeks when we're closer to the deadline. And if they're really out of it, at that point, you've got to take a look.
What GM in the league would, because you keep saying Moreno wouldn't trade him, that's just not what he would do. Is there a GM, is there a type of GM that would trade Ohtani in this situation if he was their player?
Oh, a number of GMs I'm sure would, but this is an ownership decision. It starts there. And if Moreno is not comfortable doing this, it's not going to happen. Now, he wasn't comfortable doing it last year, which is when they should have done it. That's when they could have gotten the Juan Soto return. But for whatever reason, they decided not to. They wanted to take their shot this season. And to me, at this point, they might as well see it through from their perspective. Again, I'm not giving this as my opinion because I'd like to see him traded. Not just for the action, but it's going to be ending as we think it's going to be ending, right? They're not making the playoffs. He's not signing back. You might as well trade him. All the things that Todd just said. I just don't see Moreno doing that. And I may be reading him wrong. Who knows? Maybe he reverses course, but I don't see it, guys.
I think the biggest thing is getting guys in return. So now, okay, so they don't have Shohei Ohtani going, or he stays, Trout stays. They don't make the playoffs. What's next? Are they going to try and get a pitcher? What are they going to try and do?
Well, that's a good question. And I assume they would try to do what they've done for a while now. But this is a team that has not gone over the luxury tax threshold once, I believe. So, all right, it's nice you got big stars, even though in one case, Rendon is not producing. But if you're going to spend, if you're going to be that kind of team, you better be that team. And you better spend a little bit more than they've spent to get better players on the field. I thought Manasian did a pretty good job, actually a very good job this offseason in putting pieces around Trout and Ohtani. They increased their depth. They've had a horrible run of injuries. There's no question about that. But they also have brought in young talent. They've promoted it aggressively. To turn it the other way right now, when they believe, I'm sure, that they still can get in the playoffs this season, and then if they get in the playoffs, maybe they can make a run. I was writing about that last week. If this team gets in the playoffs, look out. Well, 1 week changed a lot, right? That was often what happens in baseball. But again, I think we have to wait and see what happens in the next couple of weeks. If they truly fall out of it, different story. But guys, if they've got a shot with Shohei Ohtani, I don't see them doing this.
Ken, right now you look very well rested. I know that's going to change soon, right? You got All-Star coming up, and then the trade deadline madness begins. We're already quizzing you on it. So we'll stay in California because the Dodgers have pitching injuries. Kershaw doesn't seem like it's serious, and there was no way in my mind he was going to go 32 starts or something like that for them. So, okay, all good. The Dustin May news sucks when we learned that the elbow issue is very serious and he's got surgery. He's done, very talented, and hadn't pitched since May. They've got a number of other pitchers on the shelf, but they have a ton of prospects. So what do you think's next for them? How many rumors and calls are you going to hear about this team trying to acquire more pitching?
Several, many, multiple, because they need more pitching. And it's obvious, it was obvious even before the Kershaw and May news. Here's a team that has a ton of young pitching, and we've seen some of it, and some of it's quite good. Bobby Miller, Emmett Sheehan, they've shown promise, but they're young. It's tough to get into the playoffs and win in the playoffs that way. They also have Julio Urias, who is just coming off the IL, didn't look so great in his first start, and by the way, is a potential free agent. So another controllable starter, if they can get one, would be something that would be really good for them. And Scott, I'm with you. Kershaw was never going to make 35 starts, right? Hopefully this is not that big a deal. But the bottom line is they are going to need starting pitching. They know that. And once, like all teams, they get through the draft, which is in the middle of July now, not in early June, they will focus their attention first and foremost, in my mind, to getting starting pitching. They have depth in their system. They have this amazing group of young pitchers themselves. So they've always been aggressive under Andrew Friedman at the deadline. They've gotten some great players at the deadline. Darvish, Machado, Rich Hill, Josh Reddick. I expect them to do the same thing again. I forgot Scherzer and Turner. They were in that mix too. They'll be aggressive.
I'm going to switch gears, go back to the East Coast here a little bit, go down south. Do you think anybody is beating the Braves right now in the National League? This team seemed like they just, with Ronald Acuna, I mean, some of the numbers he's putting up, he's the whole league's MVP right now. Now, especially since Shohei's going down, who's beating the Braves right now?
It's tough to see anyone beating them, especially when they've got Max Fried coming back probably in a couple of weeks. Assuming he's healthy, their pitching is that much better, and it's already pretty good, and they've already got depth, too, with some youngsters who have had varying degrees of success, but they're there, and they can provide that depth. It's possible they add a starter for depth, I presume, but man, that offense, it's one of the best 1 through 9s I can remember seeing in recent years. It goes back to early 2000s Yankees and Red Sox when those teams had those powerhouse offenses. The Astros later, like in the 2017 range, I know it was when they were stealing signs, but they had a great offense. I see the Braves the same way, maybe even a little bit above those teams. It's incredible to me what they are accomplishing offensively and the way they are doing it. It's a first inning blitz seemingly every other night. So they're in a great spot. I don't see any team in the National League beating them, but long season, guys. We don't know who's going to get hurt. We don't know who's going to get traded. We don't know if one of these disappointing teams, Mets, Padres, Cardinals, or more, are going to snap out of it and pose a legitimate threat. Right now, you would say no. But again, we're talking early July right now. Talk to me in early October.
Are the Braves the biggest movers at the trade deadline, and we have a boring trade deadline and the rich get richer?
I don't know that they'll be the biggest movers because they don't have all that much that they need to do, Eric. But the idea of a boring trade deadline, which we've talked about for a number of weeks now, right? Too many buyers, not enough sellers. Let's see. Let's see what happens in the next few weeks. I never believe it's going to be boring because it always turns out to be rather interesting one way or the other. You don't always see Max Scherzer get traded, but you often see a lot of moves that are quite interesting. So with the Mets possibly selling, that makes things interesting for sure. If indeed they can somehow figure out a way to trade Scherzer or Verlander, won't be easy as we've discussed. Other teams too could make this thing interesting, and there are always, always, always surprises. So I'm not banking on boring, put it that way.
Let me ask you this: are the New York Mets making the playoffs? Because I know that New York contingency wants to hear a little bit about them. 6.5 out of the wild card. Will they make the playoffs this year?
Todd, there's still no reason why they shouldn't. They have a very talented group of players, and it includes Scherzer and Verlander at the top of that list. They have to play like it, though, and that's something they have not done. Now, that move that they made last week to get Trevor Gott, actually just a couple of days ago, in which they took on $4 million more in salary with Flexen to do that, that was interesting to me. That indicated their mindset as of this moment, which is we're still trying. We are still going for this, and if things change and if they have to flip Trevor Gott later, oh, that's fine. But they are in a mode right now where they're trying to salvage this thing. The Padres are the same. And I don't expect necessarily that to shift in it for a couple of weeks. They're going to be a team possibly that goes right down to the end because they want to see where they are. Now, maybe they get right back in this thing and they're buyers in a big way. But they're in a precarious situation right now. They have to start playing better. It's not early anymore. It's not even close to early anymore. It's almost the deadline. Let's go.
Hey, Ken, I know you have Mariners Astros this weekend before we hit the All-Star break. So can you do some digging for us if you haven't already? Why are the Mariners trying to cut money when they're not even close to where, in my mind, they should be from a payroll perspective? I know Trevor Gott is not the world's best reliever, but he's been effective. He's been a little above average. Certainly could use the bullpen depth. Seems like they just sold him to cut the money out from Chris Flexen. What's going on here? Are they about to sell? Because otherwise, this looks real weak on their side.
I interpret it the other way, Scott. In fact, I was told the other way. They've won 4 straight, by the way. They've looked better in the last few days. And that move for them was to clear payroll for the deadline. So possibly now they have more flexibility. Not possibly, they do have more flexibility for the deadline should they choose to buy. Now, they have not played well enough to necessarily justify buying just yet, but this is a team that wants to build off last year, a team that obviously has made certain moves to get better. Not enough, I would agree with you on that, but that move was not to necessarily indicate a future sell-off. It was more to create flexibility, and we'll see what they do with that flexibility, if anything.
Don't you think it's concerning though? Just because I'm like, the Mariners need to cut payroll mid-season in order to make room for a deal. It's not like they're. I don't know what their exact number is. My guess is payroll-wise, they're kind of middle of the pack. So why did they need to cut payroll? They didn't spend for years during their rebuild, and they were like, we're going to go for it. Like, to me, I'm always looking at that. I know Ohtani's different, but bad indicator if the Mariners feel like they have to sell off a contract to make a deal mid-season.
No, Scott, I hear you. And I don't know where their ownership is on this, and I don't know exactly what they're thinking. But when I asked that question that you posed to me, that's what I was told, that this was not simply a move to get out of a deal. It was a move to create that payroll flexibility. It gives them more. I would agree. They have not spent enough. And if you go back to the offseason, it was Colton Wong and Teoscar Hernandez. That was pretty much all that they did. And they made the Winker trade, etc. It wasn't a big offseason by any stretch of the imagination, especially for a team that was coming off that great run that they had at the end of 2022. So, yeah, this is a team to watch. A team to watch to see what their actions are, because there will be a lot of words spoken in the next few weeks, a lot of words spoken after the deadline. The actions tell you what the team is actually doing and thinking.
Well, the actions of Jerry Dipoto are so you can't predict them. So how do you follow, in all the years you've seen him do his trades and his manipulations, like he's already started, how do you kind of predict what they're going to do? Because he is different than all GMs, I would assume.
Preller is in his category for sure. And okay. I don't try to predict. Even going back many years when I used to be on MLB Network, they'd ask me, well, what do you think this guy's going to... I don't know. And the truth of the matter is, I can think of myself as a great reporter, and I'm probably getting 5% of what's going on, right? Because there are all kinds of conversations going on. And as much as I try to find out what's going on, it's not that easy. And there are things talked about we always find out later that were discussed before the deadline. There are things that we never find out about. And there are things that, yes, come to fruition and we learn about and understand. So if you're asking me to predict what's going to happen at the deadline, Eric, forget it. I'm not even going to try. It would be pointless for me to try. What my job is to try to find out.
Hey,
Adam, go ahead, Scott.
No, it's you, AJ.
No,
it's you.
You got it.
People want to know that you're here live. Go ahead.
I'm alive. Go ahead. Baby. We're asking the same question, so go ahead.
Flip it to him. You ask it better than I do.
Ken, I was on St. Louis radio today, and Adam Wainwright went on the IL, but they didn't really specify what was going on. So do you have any insight? Is it just a mental break? Is it just a physical break? Is it just he's not pitching very well?
I think the specification was shoulder soreness, if I'm not mistaken. He mentioned that or alluded to it in his post-game comments that he's not right physically. It certainly looks like a good time for a break based on the way he's pitched lately, and it's really tough to watch this. I hope this isn't in the end for him. He has said it's not the end. He's coming back, but lately it has not been good. And he's had this distinguished career, and you always hate to see a career end in this kind of fashion, if indeed it is ending, but it's his last season, so it's ending at some point. And he's just been too much of a warrior, too much of a competitor, too much of a winner to bet against. So I'm not betting against him. I would never bet against Adam Wainwright. Let's hope this stint on the IL gets him straight or helps him get straight, and he starts pitching like the guy we've seen for so many years.
It's the WBC. It's definitely the World Baseball Classic. I'm messing around, but that's anyone that's hurt this year. I still see it on social. People like, shouldn't have pitched him in the WBC.
Of course,
relax.
Of course.
Yeah, Ken, I got that in there for you. I know you would like that. Appreciate the time. I know you're going to Yankee Stadium today. We'll talk to you either later in the week or we'll see you in Seattle.
Sounds great, guys. Thanks.
Ken, loosen up that button on the top there a little bit, bud. Come on. It's hot out there, big dog. Come on, baby.
I'm no Todd Frazier, man.
See you, Ken.
See you guys.